We lose 1% of our collagen every year starting in our 20s, which means we must start banking collagen for plumper, glowing skin. Do it with Neutrogena Collagen Bank. Trust me, I'm a banker.
Shouldn't they trust me, the dermatologist?
It's not a competition.
This broadcast is intended
Space Ghost, 15 seconds till showtime.
Any rebroadcast, broadcast, or retransmission without the express permission.
Ready for a power trip.
But then soon we overcame them all. One by one, side by side, we gave each other love that's real and everlasting. Real love. We've come a long way.
I love doing seasonal roundup videos, but I wanted to shake up how I do them again, so... The Little Things is now The New Challengers, my top 15 favorites of the year so far. That can apply to any distinction from YouTube, games, movies, books, music, you name it. We all have our favorites, but it's just as fun to see how more recent hype stacks up. The New Challengers, if you will. And as excited as I was to iron out my top picks for these, that left a whole lot of honorable mentions on the floor, which I want to shout out with a quick sentence each before we move on to the main top 15. 48 years later had massive zombie shoes to fill as a follow-up to my pick for the best zombie movie ever made, but it not only managed to be a super faithful successor, but cut its own distinct image in some wild ways. Elio hit those Pixar emotion chemicals super spot on, and I just love a bad guy who's also a good dad. Smash Remix is an emulator mod for the original Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64 that idealizes a version of the game with third-party characters germane to that era, which already fills me up on nostalgia for the dingier sound design and aesthetic that game had that I always loved, but they've also done the huge service to me of adding in a completely era-accurate Crash Bandicoot, more authentic than any real version could ever be, and it's like a void in my heart has been filled by that. K-pop is on the list of things I can't let myself get too into, because they'd make me even more annoying in between wrestling and Star Trek, and K-pop Demon Hunters has put me dangerously adjacent to that hypothetical path. F1 is about as cheeseburgery a sports movie as you can get, but sometimes a good cheeseburger hits the spot, and there aren't fry cooks much better than director Joseph Kosinski. Deltarune's new chapters keep finding ways to iterate on its house style, and as long as it keeps being inventive and inviting, I'll keep coming back. The Sex Lives of College Girls is stinking cute, funny, and I can't wait for another season. Oh, shit. Okay, moving on. On that same token, Adults on FX has really brought back the Friends-like hangout sitcom for a new generation, and I hope it continues to thrive in that ecosystem. Overcompensating is also pretty good, but I mostly watched it for Charlie XCX's guest spot, and I'd be lying if I said she did not eat.
Betty!
The Day the Earth Blew Up was a welcome return to form for hand-drawn cartoons that may fortuitously lead to more of that ilk I'm excited to see. Shotgun Cop Man is an exercise in patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time, blended with the fast-paced speed-run action genre of Super Meat Boy or Ape Out, and it's wildly addicting. A Vengeance Most Foul made me happy to see my old clay-sculpted friends again in glorious feature length. Hacks continues to be a solid load-bearer in the tumultuous HBO lineup, with the help of Gene Smart and Hannah Einbinder being superstars. The Monkey is the most comforting and optimistic movie I've ever seen where somebody's head gets lit on fire. Capcom Fighting Collection 2 is stealing my summer hours just as its predecessor did, with a lineup of games I've been dying to play and write about. Invincible continues to be my favorite recurring series streaming once a year, the arcs revolving around Powerplex, the Invincible War, and Conquest being some of the best bloody superhero action they've divulged yet, and serious bar raisers for what's to come. Predator Killer of Killers has some of the best action set pieces in the franchise, even if the narrative framing device tying them together is a little forced and dumb. Split Fiction is a total thrill ride of a co-op game, and I shout out my buddy Brandon for waiting patiently while I die a bunch whenever we play it. Tim Robinson is one of our era's seminal comedic geniuses, and Friendship is further evidence of that. And last, but certainly not least, I wanted to reserve the last slot in this segment moving forward for my favorite snack of the season, because I always enjoy my favorite media with a snack, and if I'm gonna recommend you one, I might as well recommend you the other to accompany it. This summer, I'm sending up Outlaw Snacks. I found these randomly at the store, and I was drawn in by the sci-fi character parodies on the bag, and I gotta give the people who made these a fist bump for making their chili lime mascot Spiciosa, because I always need further proof that Furiosa will always be famous, no matter how many people are wrong about it. But the real superstar is the Space Puffs, with the little rocket raccoon looking mouse guy. They may look just like a simulacrum of Cheetos, but they have this zesty dill twist that makes a world of difference. They've been my munchie of choice all year. My friends across state borders have had a harder time finding these, but if you do manage, I think they're a terrific little crunch. Okay, with those out of the way,
New opponent is ready to face you.
Dogman is a movie about a police officer who gets decapitated and surgically fulfilled with the head of a dog, and it's one of the most emotionally intelligent films I've recently watched. Zany and eccentric as it sounds, Dogman is based on the comics of the same name by Dave Pilkey, who also wrote the Captain Underpants books, which were obsessive childhood favorites of mine, not just for the juvenile humor, but because for every stroke of toilet jokes Pilkey employed, he was always equally magnanimous enough to employ some surprisingly stark social commentary. Captain Underpants being sort of his love letter to creative C students that the public school system and wider society dismisses. And while I long grew out of regularly checking these books out to a point that I wasn't overly familiar with Dogman going into this movie, I was super pleased with how little this movie talked down to its audience. It's definitely goofy, but every strange character and visual has this handmade touch that pairs extremely well with the wider narrative context that these books are supposed to be creations by metafictional kids. What results is a candy-colored bazooka of madness with a shockingly poignant emotional MO. A story focused on Petey the evil cat and his complicated feelings about raising a clone who idolizes the hero that undoes him at every turn, fulfilling the sort of villain who is also your dad mold in a way that always really touches me. I think a lot of animated movies want to juggle therapy talk with hijinks, and this film shows that influence at points, but something about the full-hearted authenticity employed in both halves of the formula really grew on me. Starbarians has been the long-running passion project of animator Harry Partridge for as long as I've been a fan of his. A fluidly animated mishmash of influences to the effect of He-Man and Ralph Bakshi that stands as a sort of parody of 80s action cartoons focused on Kilgar, an alien barbarian with none of the restraint shown by his cartoon hero contemporaries. Partridge has long chronicled his efforts in greenlighting multiple Starbarians projects, and at the risk of coming off untoward, I've always admired the efforts Partridge has put into his diligence with these characters, even if it resulted in diminishing returns that would discourage an animator of lesser spirit financially. To that end, I was anxious to support Harry's release of Starbarian Tales, a comic book adaptation of the characters in Harry's signature detailed art style. While many would consider Starbarians a comedy first and foremost, I think what makes it truly compelling is Harry's genuine skill for world building, really sucking you into the alien worlds he creates in details, even if it's only on the page, to be destroyed in some hilarious fashion. Physical copies of this release are on a limited run, and I think they're still circulating within some of Harry's outlet, but you can find digital scans no matter what by supporting Harry Partridge's Patreon. There are very few creators that deserve support more than him. Fatal Fury in my 2025 ought to be enough to earn a spot on this list on its own merit. SNK's answer to Street Fighter that not many people realize is the Iron Man to King of Fighters Avengers, and it's been long overdue for a revisit. That said, it's hard to dismiss that this had some bizarre press around it, as the IP's long absence from the limelight called for some thin spread and questionable collaborations with very little payoff. That said, I find it equally hard to deny that this was, at its best, the intense footsie fighting game I'd expect from a personal favorite I hold as dear as its predecessor, Mark of the Wolves. This game making its wedge in the FGC with a guard-breaking super meter tied to segments of your life bar of your choice, allowing a layer of strategy you don't always get to experiment with in the genre, alongside the rev meter, which took me some getting used to but had me feeling like an untouchable red-hot stove of a combatant in the occasions that it did kick into gear. I find with SNK games, it's easy to get walloped and just have a bad time with a character who doesn't mesh with you, making experimental longevity less of a factor in this one compared to other fighting games. But when you do find a character that speaks to you, they're capable of speaking volumes. The combos I pulled off as the staff-wielding Billy are memories that'll really stick with me. You couldn't tell by the shockingly myriad show tunes he shoehorned into Family Guy, and/or the zoot suit-clad mouse he plays in the Sing movies. Seth MacFarlane's true passion is jazz, particularly of the Rat Pack crooner age, so it should come as little surprise he's put out some albums already ingratiating to his niche, though I'd argue this project came to a head this year via Lush Life, a composition MacFarlane made with the estate of Frank Sinatra, consisting of lost and unrecorded songs from the archives of Old Blue Eyes. It's long been a piece of neat party trivia that Seth is genuinely a really good singer, and the fact that these were ever fit for Sinatra before his death should indicate their quality. But I think what I really love about Lush Life as a project is that Seth could do genuinely anything with the millions of dollars he's amassed through his cartoons, and I think doing something as personal and artistic as a jazz album is one of the coolest things you could do with all of those resources. And the more we see of feeble minds using money and power to push the limits of human decency, it's extremely refreshing to see old art honored and revived, as opposed to ghoulishly replicated or even destroyed.
Again, I was wrong.
Something I've loved about modern movie culture is the extent to which the fun of discussing film is almost equal parts talking the box office and records as if they were sports scores, and speculating what it means that Thunderbolts underperformed as if it were the numbers scored by the Knicks last night, perhaps being more fun than watching Thunderbolts to some, which is why I'm surprised it took so long for something like The Studio to get made. I've seen criticism levied that the satire of this show is a bit broad, and honestly, you won't find ideologues in this show for anything you won't see if you spend long enough on film Twitter. But I think as inside baseball as it gets, it's saying what a lot of folks are thinking, saved by exceptional writing. Take The Pilot, where Seth Rogen's character is tasked with finding an auteur to make a shallow Kool-Aid movie. His altruism in the name of artful film causes him to meet with Martin Scorsese to loophole this concept into a deep historic piece about the Jonestown suicides, only for him to chicken out under studio pressure and face the need to balance his career with his artistic inclinations, and how hard that is to do with a measly executive backbone. The Fawlty Towers plot stemming from that premise balloons into chaos from there, and the strong writing is hoisted by an incredible cast. Rogen himself marshalling Kathryn Hahn, Ike Barinholtz, and Catherine O'Hara, among a ton of other talented stars, to hysterical effect. The sides of my brain that love film discourse was scratched just as much as the itch reserved for enjoying just a really good sitcom. Comedians Connor Ratliff and Griffin Newman have made a career out of dressing up like George Lucas and Watto, and somehow roping prestigious talk show subjects and celebrities into their expanded roleplay. It's called The George Lucas Talk Show, and I love it.
It was Linda Ronstadt,
Yeah.
but I have to tell everybody.
Yes.
On the
Spill.
airplane, it was a 6-hour flight.
Yeah.
You never stopped sucking face with her.
George! Oh my God! A voice.
Remember?
George! Yeah. And my biographer said I was sexually unadventurous.
This appeals to maybe the most specific cross-section of nerd that I fall into, and you might be a bit lost if you just dive in. But the passion of those involved is hard not to get caught up in, and you can quickly see how even Hollywood royalty can't resist committing to the bit that they're talking to the real George Lucas and Watto.
And John, you're also an author.
That's true. You're also an author.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe my favorite thing they've ever done was their LA wildfire relief live stream, a truly insane 13 hours of doing increasingly strange dares to raise charity funds, which was the ultimate giant sub sandwich to keep biting precious minutes off of each night while it sat in my proverbial video leftover fridge. Just as well, it feels appropriate to mention that Griffin Newman is one of the hosts of my current favorite podcast, Blank Check, with Griffin and David, which I've plugged in these videos before but wanted to bump as their recent coverage of the films of Steven Spielberg is truly some of the best work they've ever done, which is saying a lot. Their episodes on E.T. and the Indiana Jones films feel like an extremely solid distillation of their house style, and a good place to start if you're looking to jump in. Griffin and David made me the insufferable movie nerd I am today, and there's nothing I'd love more than to share that joy with everyone. If you're like me, you think Nathan For You is one of the funniest shows ever made, and that The Curse is one of the most disturbing shows ever made. So you might also align with me that the first season of The Rehearsal is mostly just okay, which is all context I wanted to front load to insist that The Rehearsal Season 2 is an entirely different beast. Staying within the premise of Nathan Fielder testing how closely he can grasp his own fixation with repeated rehearsal of everyday situations, which went as far before as building housing structures and holding performance classes to help people practice social interactions, and that was just in season 1. And I want to repeat, season 2 ups the ante. It's a bit hard to recommend the works of Nathan Fielder super simply. I would point to the likes of Tim Robinson or Larry David, not to compare the brand of humor necessarily, but the specificity and neurosis that they all traffic in. Experiences with anxiety and social barriers that are foreign to some people and hit like a nuclear missile to others. And the way Fielder not only provokes thought about these topics, but commits up to 100 to do so, to the point of blurring lines of fiction and reality, at least for this particular viewer, was downright astonishing. I hate leaving a recommendation on this note, but truly, you'll know if you're in the pocket for this one shortly after you try it. But if you're a sicko like me, you're in for a hell of a ride. In a landscape that would make you believe that to be a rip-roaring good time at the movies is in stark and distilled contrast from being about something or anything, Sinners breaks that binary over its knee and dances on its grave by blending the cerebral interpersonal horror of The Thing, the cathartic ultraviolence of Django Unchained, and the crucial abandonment of caution demonstrated by Everything Everywhere All at Once, to not just cut a singular and unforgettable impression, but to throw its hat in the ring as potentially 2025's defining auteur blockbuster. Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan continue to prove to be an unstoppable team, presenting something that's somehow simultaneously a deeply intimate and character-based crime thriller and a broad, spectacle-laden dark fantasy with complementary accessible themes. And Yet, as wide and even somewhat populist as that sounds, this is also undeniably an interpersonal showcase. Just about every member of its massive cast has an amazing interaction with one another, whether it's Haley Steinfeld breaking free of the teen pop star box once and for all, Delroy Lindo giving the performance of his life, or Michael B. Jordan having over-the-top chemistry with Michael B. Jordan. I find myself comfortably describing this as what I wished Bong Joon-ho's Mickey 17 was, the result of an absurdly talented director cashing a blank check and creating something that any virtually lesser artist could never get away with if they had any less power or sway. A masterful intrigue piece that provoked a lot of thought in complement to a heart-pounding popcorn movie, and neither aspect feels like a side dish to the other.
Wow, Daffy Duck! You're the greatest!
Thanks. Take a check.
Sure, Daffy. Just need some ID.
Are you serious? How many big cartoon stars come into this store?
Checks are a pain, but your bank has a better way, the Visa Check Card. And if your ATM card has a Visa logo on it, you've got one. It automatically deducts from your checking account everywhere Visa's accepted.
You're despicable.
Visa Check Card works just like a check, only better. What a maroon.
In keeping with Toonami tradition, we've changed the lineup, trying to keep it fresh.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Don't tell me now, I'm just getting started.
Doom is the game series I look to when I want to feel like a cartoon character playing a parody of a shooter, as opposed to a serious shooter. And as someone bad at truly serious shooters, I really like playing as the Doom Slayer, the most fantastical of power fantasies, wielding every weapon under the sun to rip and tear. All of this is to say that Doom: The Dark Ages is a bottomless well of demon blood to spill, and I'm loving every second of it. I think it should say a lot that I often booted this up on my PlayStation figuring, well, I'll do some mindless shooting for half an hour or so before bed, only to be fully engulfed in the straightforward but layered combat of this game, balancing every kind of projectile you can fathom, from gunfire to plasma rays to pulverized skull shards, all supported by the new mechanical breadwinner of this installment, the shield that the Slayer can use for new defensive options in melee during openings, which makes the combat of Dark Ages feel like a combination of its roots as a shooter with a rhythmic action game like Punch-Out of all things. But instead of an exceptionally satisfying beatdown of one jump, you're reducing a massive horde to bloody mulch. I've loved the Doom Revival games as much as the next Slayer, but while Doom 16 leaned a little heavy toward hardcore shooter mechanics and Eternal kinda over-calibrated into heavy platforming and puzzles, Doom: The Dark Ages has the Goldilocks in me decreeing it just right. Animation obviously takes years upon years from concept to product to market, which is why Common Side Effects feels as close to an artistic miracle as its exceptional quality would indicate, focused around the premise dissecting the tragic fact that all of humanity would fail to make a net positive out of something as novel as a cure-all mushroom. This all-natural godsend is instead turned into a war bounty by fiendish pharma corporations and conflicted characters. Even above the compelling and often funny writing and excellently directed cast, it's how the show's sort of uncanny art style lends itself to trippy imagery that sticks with me, turning something as potentially clinical as a medicinal espionage piece into something cathartic and memorable, especially in the hellscape our nation has been morphing into. Two of the big minds behind this show, Steve Healy and Dave King, have been podcasters I've really enjoyed listening to for a while, and that's led me to truly appreciate the thoughtfulness that goes into the characters and situations they made for this. It's not just another comedy or a gun-toting action show, it's something that takes sci-fi trappings to paint a starkly bleak picture of reality. My most recent visit to my besties living in California was beautifully punctuated by my first ever Warner Brothers Studio Lot tour, which lived up to the hype. Current leadership adjacent to an elephant in the room aside, enough of my favorite movies and shows were made under the watchful eye of the WB Water Tower that it's honestly pretty nuts I haven't done this excursion yet. And considering my friends I attended with were legit surprised by the way I was acting, that I wasn't on any kind of substance before we took the tour, it would appear all I need is to be surrounded by ephemera and memorabilia of film history to turn into a kid in a candy store. We got what I'm sure was the actual coffee served on Friends in the real Central Perk and looked at real cells of some of my favorite cartoons. No matter what dire curves WB takes as a corporation, I'll always owe it this exceptional experience I won't soon forget. There's a new Wes Anderson out, and you probably know whether you're here for that or not. But of the same token, if you got an appetite for more Wes, I think a case could be made for the Phoenician Scheme landing among his best work, kinda acting as a sample platter of his best inclinations, most easily described as the grandiose adventure and intrigue of Grand Budapest Hotel, with the broad but harrowingly relatable characters of the Royal Tenenbaum. I've talked about Wes's work with a lot of people who would be quick to determine that he's a stage director in a screen director's world, and I don't even fully disagree. But after the humbler but still great compositions of Henry Sugar and Asteroid City, this felt like a coveted return to ideas and execution that leaned downright strictly cinematic. This is indeed an espionage thriller by way of Anderson's signature house style, one that doesn't spare any expense in way of gadgets, weapons, and mortal peril. Rather, it uses the always infectious dialogue and comedic timing of any crew assembled by Wes and trades stunts and fights for droll punchlines, and as dry as that might sound, it's among the hardest I've laughed in a movie in a while. Wes balances the broad with the erudite in downright galling ways, establishing further why no one who has attempted his style has persisted as an auteur. At its core, it's a family story of a father estranged by his wealth and power from his pious daughter. But what really spoke to me is the social commentary this packaged in the fantasy painted by the narrative. Not that will be saved or destroyed by the 1%, but that someone will break through and coax them from the bare minimum kindness and charisma we've long been so bereft from. This cold but inviting logic that illustrates this is marshaled by Anderson's aesthetics and flair for the photogenic in a way that paints the Phoenician Scheme like a political cartoon in strokes that as evenly immortalize the rest of Wes's catalog as a painting or a diorama. What results is something that pops with the detail of a revolutionary satire, the kind that illustrates broad ideas in times of confusion, and for that virtue is preserved in history books. You can see a lot of movies with crashing planes, exploding blood, and critique of the rich. Maybe not all on the same plate, but in every regard, Wes perfected the thinking man's varietal. Obviously, I love video games, and I love seeing characters from video games reinterpreted and redrawn in different ways. Rujak art traffics in these awesome, highly stylized animations tied to the de facto Super Smash Bros. Universe, taking Nintendo characters and applying this 70s flavored grit and age to create a charmingly dingy feel I wish I could step right into. With nothing but his amazing drawings and canonical sound bites, you get this record store AU where you can practically smell the bodega sandwiches and hear the lax police sirens as you peruse the vinyls on display. These are just some of the most immaculate of Vibes pieces. I could watch Jack's characters for hours on end, the beautiful expressions in boarding coming together to range from funny and manic to downright emotional, alongside Jack's terrific music choices and compositions, assembling and commissioning these super impacting chiptune covers of rock and pop classics that act as a splendid mood setter. The crescendo of New Donk State of Mind makes me emotional every time. I didn't know who Robbie Williams was until this year, and I'm a little obsessed with this movie that tells his life story and also he's a chimp. As an unwashed American layman to Williams by and large, I was mostly morbidly intrigued by the high concept of Better Man as I scheduled my ticket to this one, and I was pleasantly surprised that it was by and large the shot in the arm the movie musical needed. No shade, no judgment, keep your Wickeds and Mean Girls, because my only desire is to return to this monkey over and over again. For that matter, I'm a pretty noted skeptic of the musician biopic as well, but the chip thing, gimmicky as it seems, is really effective in making that genre's tired tropes less familiar and less sexy. Robbie Williams may be known for being a smug animal, but looking at something as vulnerable as an ape really invested me in all the shit he went through in the early aughts pop star scene. I also pretty much thought this movie fully embarrassed its contemporaries with its musical numbers. High concept with great choreo. Rock DJ had my heart pumping about as hard as any fight scene I've truly loved over the last year. I'm only a little bummed that this movie has largely been dismissed, since as far as I can tell, Brits who know Robbie are sick of him, and Americans don't know him, so they're kind of baffled by the whole product. I find it a shame, since I think this movie could teach people a lot about how to make a good musician biopic and a really good big screen musical. Maybe I'm giving too much stock to the gimmick of it all, but the ups and downs Robbie goes through hit me like a truck, and I think that'd be true if he looked like himself or if he looked like Diddy Kong. Dig up this review in 20 years or so, because hopefully by then, I'll have achieved my dream of collaborating with Dua Lipa on a film telling her life story where she's portrayed by a motion capture ostrich. Look, I love my childhood memories of Mario Kart as dearly as any formative gaming experience, but I've also long felt an exhaustion with those games, which have just felt increasingly safe and bland with each installment since the Wii. I kind of figured this was just part of growing older, but when I revisited my favorite kart racers sanctioned by the likes of Crash, Sonic, and Diddy Kong, I still saw spirited and feature-rich games that Mario was so capable of becoming but seemed too complacent to fill the shoes of, until today. Mario Kart World isn't perfect, but I'd be damned if this wasn't the Mario Kart I've wanted as a kid, and that goes a long way in drawing me in today. From the day I brought my Switch 2 home after I get my chores, exercise, writing, and excursions for the day all done, I was giddy that Mario Kart World was waiting for me at the end of each day. I just can't gush enough how good it feels to ride the waves in the watery stretches of these tracks, chain tricks across rails and tiers in ways I'd think impossible in older Mario Karts, and really butt heads with the aggressive AI in higher difficulties, made all the more intense with the whopping 24 racers on the track. But the racing's exuberant yin has a more soothing, self-paced yang in the form of the new free roam mode, which connects every track in the game in a gigantic, cohesive map and just lets you go nuts, seeking collectibles, practicing your driving skills, and completing challenges. Free roam has its critics, but I can't get enough of it. Maybe it's the kid in me that just loved aimlessly exploring the hub worlds in Crash Team Racing, Diddy Kong Racing, and Kirby Air Ride, sometimes more than actual racing. Even when I'm not hyper-focused on unlocking costumes or items in the expansive map, at the end of the day, it was downright therapeutic to just get lost in this open world, letting the day-night cycle soothe me and colorfully recontextualize each environment, crossing oceans to go from desert bazaars to snowy ecosystems, seeing that Wario will pat his belly sometimes when he clocks a drive-thru, or Pauline stretches her arm out to feel the rushing air by her when you drive in a straight line long enough, observing the painstaking detail in every inch of this game. It took me to my favorite favorite memories on long road trips, seeing landmarks fly by and destinations morph around you with distance. And no road trip is complete without some great radio. The composition of this game covers north of 100 classic Mario tunes with a gorgeous orchestra, and the result is fully astounding. Just listen to some of these tunes and tell me you don't want to just wispily drive around. He's already shot up among my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. Not a single skip in the genuinely enormous OST. It's the best the Mushroom Kingdom has ever looked and sounded, and I'm just head over wheels in love with this game. But for now, I have other destinations to race toward. As I publish this, I'm preparing for a trip to Chicago, where even more points of interest are sure to crop up, and I can't wait to tell you all about those and to hear what you think of this video. Until then, may your summer keep on rocking. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Continue.